Since the beginning of time, every major religion has references to out-of-body experiences.
What we know is that the people of power, rulers, priests, and warriors were trained in these things.
They find themselves rising up from their body to the ceiling and then looking back at their body lying there.
You're perceiving the world from a different vantage point.
It's an experience of an alternate reality, an alternate kind of dimension.
With out-of-body experiences, I'm seeing this world, the world I see with my eyes and my ears. How's that possible without my eyes and my ears? Not only how is it possible, but why?
My name is Jade Shaw, and in 2014 I had a powerful out-of-body experience that changed my life. So much so that afterwards I left a 12-year career in the arts to dedicate my life to exploring consciousness. I took a master's degree in transpersonal psychology and began researching the transformative effects of this phenomena. My quest for answers took me around Britain, Europe, and the USA, where I met and interviewed people who had had extraordinary experiences similar to my own.
It can manifest in a few different ways, but one of the kind of conventional ways, I guess, is this sort of feeling of vibration occurring, and it's as if you have an energy body that's getting separated, you know.
These sounds, these intracranial sounds of, like, yeah, the radio interference, the buzzing, the thunder.
And all of a sudden this vibration would sort of kind of like, it just felt like inside, not so much it was on my lower body, it was more all up the top, and then it was the head, and this ringing, a really loud, intense roar and ringing. It was really, really uncomfortable, really, really intense. And I kind of lifted my head up and it felt like a heavy weight. My head was like a bowling ball, and I'm lifting this up, and it was like, but I could feel that I was separating from my physical body.
What we see when we study subjects that are able to induce the vibrational state is that we see that there is a very high increment of the gamma waves. So we see a peak of 200 Hertz in the gamma band wave. And that's very peculiar, that's unheard of. This is not something that is common. And so what we see is that for a few seconds we see the subject reaching up to 200 Hertz. And normally what we see, for example, when studies about meditation, we see that, you know, meditators, different types of meditation technique will induce 70, 80, 60 Hertz per second, but not that high.
I just found myself out of the body just going up and up and up, and there was no sort of violent exiting process. It was just this beautiful lift, and I was just, yeah, wow, just going with it.
I think the first time I got outside, I was just like completely in awe that I was flying down the road.
When you're on the physical plane, it's mind-blowing. But then when you're on like the astral planes, the colours and the expansiveness.
Astral projection is an esoteric term. It goes back to probably the occult literature from the 19th century and before, and it essentially references the idea of an astral body, which was popularized by the Theosophical Society, an essential idea that there's an etheric body, an astral body, and multiple other bodies. But actually in the science, we find that only about 30% of people actually experience any kind of energy body while they're having an out-of-body experience.
I remember that the very first point when I looked at my hand and I saw that I wasn't this physical body. I knew I was physically outside of it.
And also, my senses are like superhuman. They're not infinite, but they're so much better. Like, I can see for absolute miles. I can zoom in to string level. At least that's how it feels.
I could see everything in my room exactly the way it was. I could see myself breathing, sleeping in the exact same position that I was. And when I came back to my body, it's like I woke up in that same position. I don't know what that was, but it was more vivid than just a dream. It felt like I actually left myself and I was on top of myself, floating, watching myself sleep.
When I spoke to my teacher Lama Yeshe Rinpoche about the differences between lucid dreaming and out-of-body experience, he said, lucid dream in head. Now you go out of head. This is the point.
The difference between lucid dreaming and out-of-the-body experience for me mainly is the shaking of the body. They also can happen when you are awake.
If you've only had a few lucid dreams and a few out-of-body experiences, they can seem confusingly similar. But there are absolutely 100% lucid dreams and 100% out-of-body experiences. But there is also a third category of something where you're in the lucid dream and then can exit into an out-of-body experience, and even an out-of-body experience, it then drops back down into a lucid dream.
You can project out of your body, but you can then lose it, and then you end up in a lucid dream. You can go through all stages and it's all mixed up. So you go through normal to wake to dream, and it's all muddled and it's all a bit in between.
My kind of reality test for that is if I try to change my body, to see if I say, okay, if I'm dressed now in blue and say, okay, purple, if it changes, I'm dreaming. If it doesn't change, it's an out-of-the-body experience.
My wife summed this up perfectly, actually. She said that a lucid dream is like gaining access to the files in your laptop. You have access to the files, to the photos, to the hard drive. That's like having access to your internal psychology, just as you do in a lucid dream. But in an out-of-body experience, you use the laptop to access the World Wide Web, to access the internet, where you have not only access to your own internal files, your own internal psychology, but actually to the huge collective psychology, the universal mind itself.
And I suspect what's taking place, the pineal gland in the brain, this tiny little object in the centre of the brain, is generating in some way substances that actually alter our states of consciousness, seem to open our doors of perception to perceiving a much broader reality.
Out-of-body experiences occur within an altered state. What is an altered state? It is any experience of non-ordinary perception. Could be as little as a daydream, as much as hypnosis and psychedelic experience.
It seems that there's a kind of an overlap between one form of reality and another, and they seem to overlap in the mind. There's been a lot of research done in this, and it's called the metachoric model. It's the idea that we carry a model of reality inside our heads, and we travel within that model of reality. But it doesn't mean that model of reality isn't real. It just means it's a different form of reality.
The psyche, or the soul, is a whole dimension of reality. And that's key, because it's the bardos for the Tibetan Buddhists. It's the imaginal realms, the Sufis call it. Because it is the imagination, but not the imagination as something unreal, but the imagination as a transcendent reality, as something which is more real in a way.
What most stood out was how vivid the experience was. It was very vivid for me. And in terms of like the sequentials of how it actually happened, like me coming out of my body, snapping back in, I'm not too sure how that happened, but the key moments was the fact that I was able to observe everything as it was.
But even the most, ordinary... the self is not a soul or a spirit or an astral body or something that lives inside us. Oh, lots of people believe it is. In an out-of-body experience, you are not travelling in the real physical world, going to all these different places. You're travelling in your own imagination, in the potential of your own mind.
If it's all in our imagination, how does this explain verified experiences in which the person brings back information they couldn't have known before? Out-of-body experience researcher Graham Nichols has had such an experience.
So my Soho bombing experience happened in 1999, and I was with a group of friends basically, and I was teaching the G technique, which is one of the methods that I use to induce an out-of-body experience. I went into a very deep trance, probably the deepest I've ever experienced, or definitely one of the deepest. And I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street in central London. And I was looking down Old Compton Street, and I saw an explosion burst out from the right-hand side of the street. And then I saw the sort of chaos ensue as people realized what had happened. And then I felt this strong emotional sort of energy hit me in the chest. And I came back to my body, but I was in this sort of deep, still in this quite deep void trance-like state. And I stayed in that state until one of the other people that was there with me sort of coaxed me out of this deep trance. And then I described to them what I'd seen, that I'd seen this bombing in Soho. And I had this strong conviction that I felt that it was precognitive. And essentially 5 days later, there was a bombing in that location as I'd seen it in the out-of-body experience.
Perhaps, if during an out-of-body experience we don't perceive space and time in the same way, could we potentially tap into wider realities beyond the five senses? This question led me to the Monroe Institute in Virginia, USA, a leading establishment which has been researching this phenomena for over 40 years. In fact, declassified US government documents have revealed that in 1978, the CIA sent several of their officers to the Monroe Institute to learn techniques which could be used by spies to gain enemy intelligence. One of the teachers who was offered similar training is author William Buhlman.
Before, I was clueless about the nature of reality, really. And I wasn't a believer in any of this stuff. I did not believe out-of-body experiences existed at all. To me, this was just a theory that somebody had presented to me. So I tried a technique for 24 days. And on the 24th day, I had my first out-of-body experience, which was a life changer, total life changer. One day, during a typical, let's just say the initiation of the experience, I found myself shooting up through layers of color. And it was shocking. It was a little scary, to put it quite clearly. And next thing I know, I feel like I'm going to lose it. I feel like my entire consciousness is being stretched across the universe. And the end result is I'm floating in a sea of white light. Suddenly you go from being focused on the physical as the only reality to, oh my God, there's a multi-dimensional continuum here we can explore and experience firsthand.
And around these times, I'm trying to preach the gospel. You know, I'm trying to spread the good word. Listen, guys, listen. Yeah. There's more to life than you think. And then, naturally, they're like, you're crazy, mate. You're crazy. What are you talking about?
They just feel like it's either witchcraft, especially in African communities, that you're a witch or you're some type of occult priest or whatever. So there's a lot of stigma behind it.
It came to a certain point in my life where I almost came out about these experiences. It's like I just didn't want to hide it anymore.
I've had people say I'm initiated to the Illuminati, I've been initiated to all kinds of
It's a weird feeling because you're seeing stuff that not everybody sees, but you thought everyone did. So sometimes what becomes normal to you, you've got to realise actually that's not normal to these people.
I will give my opinion about out-of-body experiences. That is normal. What is not normal is not to have them. The problem is that we are traumatized. Energetic body gets stuck in your feet. If we weren't traumatized by life and by beliefs, everyone would be having them.
20 years ago, I did an extensive study that involved 18,000 people. It was a survey done, which I published in Secret of the Soul. And it was amazing that it was, number one, it's universal. The experience itself is universal. It doesn't matter about the culture. And that's important. But beyond that, people were having the same kind of experiences.
In Nahuatl Toltec tradition, it was practiced mainly because when you die, in the fourth step of your death, your energetic double will need to split and decide where the rest of the energy is going to exit from. For an out-of-the-body experience, the three exits are the navel, that can take you to the underworld. In the underworlds are all the pieces of your mind that are lost in dreams, in traumatic experiences like that. Here is to navigate this world. This one takes you to the heavens.
So within Tibetan Buddhism, out-of-body experience practice is used primarily as a training for death and dying, because you're having a rehearsal for that separation of the energy body from the physical body, which is exactly what will happen in the death and dying states. Within Tibetan Buddhism, out-of-body experience is known as special dream body practice. Now this is confusing because they're using the term dream body here. But what we need to understand is that within the Tibetan Buddhist belief system, there is the secondary dream that we have at night time, but there is also the primary dream of waking existence. Because this experience of everyday reality is not seen as full reality. It is seen like a dreamlike illusion that we are co-creating into existence, and a dream in which we are not fully awake and aware. Through the practice of out-of-body experience, we can become more awake in this shared dream.
I can recall a few where people actually contacted and had direct contact with dead loved ones. And they communicated with them directly, and not just through using a trance medium or some kind of channeling. So we're not talking about any intermediary. This is a face-to-face conversation with a loved one, like a father or a mother that's passed.
One of the most life-changing OBEs I ever had was when I met my dad after he died, and I had a lot of guilt surrounding it and the things that I had done, and it was just the most awful feeling. And about 90 days after he died, I had an out-of-body experience, and I went specifically to look for him. When I came back from that guilt just lifted, which was really something I had no control over. Like my logical brain was trying to work out whether that was even really him, how much can I trust this experience, it was doing all the logical brain things. But my actual physiology just totally changed. That heavy, horrible guilt just went.
Some out-of-body experiences can occur spontaneously in extreme situations, such as pregnancy and labour, intense panic attacks, and near-death experiences. In 2016, the world's largest medical near-death study was led by Dr. Sam Parnia from New York University's Langone Institute for Medicine. He looked at 2,060 cardiac arrests and found that in many cases, consciousness can remain active after someone flatlines. This challenges perceived notions around the clinical timing of death and raises questions about the nature of consciousness itself. I caught up with New York Times best-selling author Eban Alexander, a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience that dramatically changed his life.
It was a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis. The human part of my brain, the entire outer surface, was attacked and heavily damaged by a primitive bacterium that should have killed me. Certainly should have gotten rid of anything but the most primitive of conscious experiences, and yet as I went through that week-long coma due to meningitis and destruction of the neocortex, I actually experienced a far greater kind of awareness and kind of conscious experience.
A near-death experience is when someone survives a close brush with death and they experience a set of components as well. It might start with the out-of-body experience, where they may leave their body and look down at the emergency situation from above. They may describe going through a dark tunnel towards a bright light, and they feel very drawn towards that light, almost like it's got a magnetic quality. Once they're in the light, they can find themselves in a beautiful surroundings with lush green grass, vividly coloured flowers, maybe there's a stream in the background, and this is where they often meet deceased relatives or friends. Sometimes they meet a religious figure, which is usually associated with their culture. They may also meet just a being of light or sense a presence around them.
I experienced multiple different realms. It began in an earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm, but all of that shifted very dramatically when I was ushered up through a portal, through a circle of light, a melody of sound, into a brilliant ultra-real valley, the Gateway Valley. A lot of earthly features, but it was like a world of ideals. Everything was perfect. And encountering like higher souls and guardian angels, all that was perfectly real in that realm.
I wanted to see if the near-death experience was just some form of hallucination as the brain was shutting down. What I kind of found with my research is that some people gained information in ways other than through the senses that they weren't previously aware of. One of the patients in my study, he met one of his deceased relatives, and as part of his near-death experience, she gave him a message and she said, "You've got to go back to life, and when you go back, tell this relative this message." So when he did revive, he gave this message to the living relative, and she was absolutely astounded that he should know that information.
To me, as a conventional neuroscientist, that absolutely demanded some explanation, because it completely defied everything that modern neuroscience thinks it knows about the neocortex and the brain and its relationship to consciousness.
I don't think the near-death experience is a brain phenomenon. I think it's wider than that. I think what happens is the brain in some way is compromised, either through fear or through damage, and that during that, the image of the body somehow deteriorates within the brain and this new form arises.
People tend to lose fear of death after near-death experiences. And I think fear of death in itself is extremely transformational. Once you lose fear of death, everything changes in your life.
No fear of death. I know this is not it, and it's not nothing that somebody has told me. It's something that I've experienced myself, so that's a truth that nobody can take away.
Back then, I suppose I was kind of, in the you're born, you die, and that's it kind of group. Today I'm a bit like, you're born, you die, and that's it. Do people still believe that mumbo jumbo? Yeah.
It's definitely confirmed it for me. Yeah, you believe it, but you don't, like with me, I have to see something to believe it. I have to see it, and then I'm like, okay. And I've seen so much now, I have no doubt that when you die, it's just your physical body you're leaving behind, but it's your consciousness. When people say your soul, you can call it your soul, your astral body, your consciousness, it doesn't matter, it's all one thing. But it's that leaves, that goes on.
The most meaningful thing to take away from out-of-body experiences is that you're more than your physical body.
Obviously, if I'm about to get run over by a car, I'm jumping out the way. But like, I'm not afraid for it to happen.
It brings acceptance of life, acceptance of the reality of life and of death. So that feeling of acceptance is incredibly transformational.
DMT, often called the spirit molecule, is a chemical substance found within almost all plants and animals. Some people have claimed that near-death-like experiences can result from ingesting DMT, but are they really the same thing?
Near-death experiences are typically more kind of earthly in their origin, so you may see the room itself and perhaps your body in it from a disembodied perspective with an out-of-body experience. With DMT, typically you're in another world altogether. A world composed of energy and geometry and strange beings. So it's an out-of-body experience of a kind, which if you tick a box on a questionnaire looks similar, but phenomenologically, you know, the actual content of the experience is very different, I think.
The similarities between DMT experiences and NDEs are quite limited. Yeah. And most of the powerful features, the most striking features of NDEs do not feature in DMT experiences, like the life review or the contact with deceased relatives or the sense of entering a tunnel and so on.
DMT is also one of those substances that induce out-of-body experiences, perhaps not to the same extent as ketamine, but there are some differences, however. You know, that DMT experiences often are concurrent with geometric patterns or the encounters with pixies and elves, which you don't typically get on out-of-body experiences. It can help us perhaps though try and explain out-of-body experiences because DMT is naturally occurring in the human body, but there's not a one-to-one relationship between the two experiences.
The doors of perception was William Blake, the idea that our perceptions only give us a very small part of reality. But sometimes with mind-altering substances, dimethyltryptamine, for instance, as an example, it broadens out and the doors of perception are opened and suddenly our perceptions are much wider.
One particular experience I had was deeply profound in that I'd become a point of consciousness, and on the journey back, I came back and I could see these strange creatures, and I was like, well, and then I realized I was looking at myself and my friend on the floor. For me, it was deeply profound, you know. I'd say that experience has influenced my thinking about the nature of reality, and in that I'm certainly very open to the idea that consciousness is a separate entity to the body.
In 2002, when a neuroscientist called Olaf Blanke was operating on an epileptic patient with electrodes all over the brain, and he could stimulate different places. And he discovered that if he stimulated a spot on the right temporoparietal junction, he could produce bodily distortions, or at the extreme, a complete out-of-body experience. So we know that that spot, disturbed, can produce an out-of-body experience. Why?
Those studies that have tried to induce out-of-body experience through electric stimulation or neuromodulation, they are very interesting. But the question is, does that mimic really the real experience or not? Because when you are stimulating areas of the brain associated with smell, the person is, for example, perceiving the smell of a strawberry. The aroma of the strawberry is not there present, but the person can record and can even smell or have the impression of the smell.
the area of the brain that they're stimulating produces an experience that's not very consistent with the type of experiences that people have, what I would consider a genuine out-of-body experience. So a sense of moving over a distance, going to another location, perceiving things accurately that are happening around them, things like that don't happen in these kinds of induced experiences using the TPJ, temporal parietal junction.
There are places you can stimulate the brain to mimic certain experiences. But one should not be confused by thinking that those kinds of tricks and various ways of demonstrating relationships between some types of electrical or magnetic stimulation and phenomenal experience, that you can then assume, oh, well, that's the cause of all of them. And that's one of the biggest mistakes.
So the types of things that happen are not really consistent with an out-of-body experience, which is essentially what I think many of the skeptics do. They use this sort of what I would consider overly broad definition, which then means that you could pretty much define anything as an out-of-body experience.
How real is this phenomena that is induced by this electric stimulation? Because you can say that you are just stimulated the impression of it, not the real phenomena. That is what we would think is related to out-of-body experience.
I don't think the experiences are caused by neurological activity. I think they happen at a level beyond the brain. If there are any brain changes, any changes in neurological activity, they are produced by the change in consciousness.
My view of consciousness is that it's not created by the brain, but the brain acts as a filter. I think that's very important. I've now seen many, many people with very wide states of consciousness. You just cannot explain this on a simple neurophysiological principle.
What we find with research done in hospitals now is that people who are clearly in cardiac arrest are experiencing a heightened state of consciousness, which really contradicts our understanding or the current materialist perspective that the brain produces consciousness.
The argument is, yes, the brain is disturbed somehow, but the brain isn't functioning. Oh yes, it is, they say, a little bit just round the back. Rubbish. No. To get these very wide experiences, you have to have many areas of the brain functioning properly, or it's somewhere else. And I think it's somewhere else.
Consciousness is a fundamental universal quality, which is everywhere and in everything. But there is also our own individual consciousness, which can't be separated from fundamental consciousness, because our own individual consciousness is an influx, you could say, of fundamental consciousness.
The body is an avatar. Consciousness is the player. If you play the Sims game, you make all the choices and decisions for the Sims character. The Sims character is just a computed shape, a computed form. It's just information, just like in our reality. So that gets us to the point of understanding that consciousness is not in the body. It's separate from the body. It's the player.
We normally think of the self, or feel that the self is, a me in here looking out through my eyes. That is just not on, given everything we know about the brain, the way the visual system works, everything else. There can't be somebody in there. There's no centre for the brain where we can be, and so on and so on.
There isn't anything out there or in here. This is the confusion. It's all the same thing, and what we think is physical matter is actually created by the mind, by consciousness.
So I think the main role of the brain is not to produce consciousness, but to canalize or transmit fundamental consciousness into our individual being.
People experience them all the time, right across the world. But scientists just don't want to know, doesn't fit in.
There's three reasons why they don't get taken seriously enough. One is they're still relatively rare experiences. I don't sometimes see. I see whenever I open my eyes, thank goodness. But I only sometimes have those experiences. They're on the cutting edge of where we're going. It's kind of a new possibility that hasn't really, some people better than others, all that stuff. That's the first reason. The second reason is science only looks at the sensual world. So it says that doesn't exist, or that's just an illusion or a byproduct. So it dismisses it theoretically, and therefore it doesn't want to look at it, which is a shame, because the odd things are where the new understanding will come from. And the third thing is, in the causal world, the material world, you can reproduce things generally. The more complicated it is, the harder it is to reproduce it. So experiences like telepathy happen in a story. They happen because something occurred for my loved one. Well, you can't make that happen in a lab.
An awakening experience is a temporary intensification of awareness in which the world becomes more real and in which a person transcends separateness and feels that they are part of all reality. And anybody can have an awakening experience. They occur in all kinds of different situations. They occur spontaneously in the midst of everyday life. Or some people may cultivate them consciously through spiritual practices.
So I was just literally relaxing on the sofa. Baby was asleep upstairs, husband washing up, completely mundane sort of scenario. And then I just felt energy starting to come through me. And then it started to get even bigger. And I'm like, okay, this is beyond new. But I was extremely peaceful about it, because I somehow knew that something really significant was happening. And the energy continued to expand. And I remember in that very moment understanding everything about why I got ill. All my experience identifying and attaching to the body and my mind and my ego and my spirit was all in a place that I didn't recognize my true self.
You just can't even describe these kind of experiences. And it makes that entire shift of consciousness, and you just feel like your entire self is just totally open to the universe and to all the answers.
There's this enormous love, this huge oneness, a feeling that all my questions dissolved into an understanding beyond words.
Quite often there is something more in out-of-body experiences, there was for me, than just the extraordinary sensation of seeming to be somewhere else than your body is. Something ineffable, something that I would call a mystical experience.
Although the experience of awakening is temporary, it has very powerful, long-lasting after effects. So a person may feel that they've been given a heightened awareness, a glimpse of a wider and deeper reality. And as a result, they feel more optimistic, more trusting of the world. They have a sense that their normal awareness is in some sense limited, that there is a wider awareness beyond what they normally perceive.
I think awakening is the leading edge of the evolutionary process, or it's beginning to be now. It's taking off much more because we have individuated so much.
We're coming into more of an awareness of ourselves. So physiologically, I feel like we've kind of maxed out our technology, in terms of what this car can do, the body. But in terms of our consciousness, I feel like we can just go into spaces that we just haven't explored yet.
It looks to me as if we are in the process of developing, I think. And I think the human species has the ability to enter very, very wide states of consciousness.
Do you think it's linked to evolution in some way then?
I would have thought so, because evolution looks as if it's progressive.
The whole universe has been individuating. I mean, it just blows my mind. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was hydrogen and helium. Now look, I mean, it's gone from basic gases to this. I mean, wow, that's how individuated. And then that's happened on every level. Physical individuation, biological individuation into species, and then soul individuation into individual souls. And that's a very high level of individuation, which is why when you meet people, they're really themselves. We're all different. And I think that has allowed us to become more and more conscious, to the point where we can now be conscious that we are conscious.
Things evolve to be efficient. Things don't evolve to be inefficient and wasteful. Matter of fact, that's the key idea in evolution, is that things change and the things that are inefficient go away.
As we enter an age where artificial intelligence is swiftly moving beyond the confines of the simple computer and machine, perhaps we're also entering an age where consciousness will move beyond the confines of the human body.
The most common after effects of out-of-body experiences seem to be very positive and very similar to that of some kinds of mystical experiences. They become less afraid of death, less concerned about material goods and having stuff, and more interested in other people and relationships.
Directly after that experience, I remember running down the stairs with this massive smile on my face, like I'd met God, yeah? Just fearless, you know? Just kind of like, I had this like epiphany of like, I can do anything I want with my life.
Before, I would say that I was pretty much scared. So I feel brave, a lot braver now. And also I think before my experiences, I would get stressed quite quickly, or I could snap quite quickly, whereas now I definitely feel I'm a lot more chilled.
The most common one that people describe to me would probably be some loss of fear in different forms. Sometimes it's in fear of the unknown, fear of like what an out-of-body experience could be. It might be in a very basic level like that, but at another time it might literally be that they're not so fearful of literally going out of the house, or they're not so focused on the fear that the television and the news and all of that creates. They kind of seem to reach this point where that becomes less important to them.
I just became much bolder and more daring, and I guess I just learnt this, you know, big obvious truth, which is that there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And that was like life-changing, basically.
I was always terrified of education, but I feel that, you know, again, being on the spiritual path, which the OBEs has ultimately led me to, has helped me walk in faith, where before that I was walking in fear.
It seems to also be used as a way to kind of lessen ego clinging. Because if you can have an experience of shifting out of this gross corporeal form, seeing that you're more than your physical body, you also in some ways see that you're more than your ego mind, or the egocentric mind that is so heavily attached to the physical form.
They help you understand that life isn't just getting through this physical process. It's not just getting up, going to work, coming home, watching TV, you know, getting something to eat, you know, it's not that treadmill.
I see myself building a foundation for people. I have something called CYF, Creating Young Futures. It's a branch of education where people could come and explore their own uniqueness. And yeah, it's just changed the way I want to impact the world.
For many people, the transformative effects of out-of-body experiences seem to come through a visceral experience of awe. In 2003, psychologists Haidt and Keltner published a landmark scientific study on the social and emotional functions of awe. They said that it appeared to increase people's feelings of connectedness and willingness to help others, and that moments of awe could be one of the most swift, powerful, and permanent ways to personal change.
A lot of people find that they become more tolerant of other people as well, and more compassionate and caring and loving towards other people.
I care more for animals. I've become a vegan, right, which I never thought I'd say. But I've got in touch with this kind of this emotional side of myself. I even find myself, I cried at Planet of the Apes, right? I swear. And then I was like, what's going on to me? What's happening to me?
That's the area that may have changed the most. Relationships have been a real transformative and emerging learning curve and experience.
Emotionally, I've become very, I'd say more caring and more loving, more motivated to become the best version of myself.
Some people have horrible, terrifying out-of-body experiences. They're pretty uncommon, maybe 5% of all of them. That can have unpleasant after effects, but the vast majority of effects are very positive.
And I was even questioning, maybe I've lost my mind, maybe it's down to some type of psychosis, or, I mean, honestly, it could have been, but it was too vivid and too real of an experience for me to say that, because I would have had reoccurring experiences like that in my mind again, if that was the case.
What you find in an out-of-body state has a lot to do with what you bring to that state. The state of your mind, your attitude, what you know, what you don't know, your beliefs.
People that astral project, like yourself, if I look at you, I look at the people, you are brave, because it's terrifying at first. It is terrifying, but once you get past that, you lose all that and it becomes amazing.
Some astronauts have described how when they look back at the Earth from outer space, there is a significant shift in perception. National boundaries dissolve, identity widens, and they feel a deep interconnectivity with all beings. This is called the overview effect. Is it possible that people who look back at their body have a similar experience?
It breaks you out of all the old molds and makes you aware that, oh my God, there's something very powerful and immortal, and I'm part of it, and I'm connected to it.
It's just a mask, in a way, kind of coat that we're wearing to have certain experiences, but in reality, we're just infinitely bigger than that.
So in terms of the link between self-realization and, for me, the out-of-body experience were synonymous. They were the same thing.
What we're waking up from is the past. We're waking up from our own unconsciousness. So there's a general movement towards something more, which is natural in the very fabric of what existence is, because it's the constant realization of ever greater potential.
Whether or not consciousness can expand beyond the body is still yet to be proved by mainstream science. But what is evident is that for many people, these are deeply meaningful experiences that can shape their lives in profound ways. reduced fear of death, awakening experiences, new perspectives on relationships, transforming fears, receiving life insights, and healing grief can all arise from out-of-body experiences. If fully integrated, they can be a powerful catalyst for psychological and spiritual growth, and in some cases can lead to radical self-transformation.
The thing that struck me most is how much doing this research has opened my eyes and opened my mind as well. I think I was very scientific because of my training as a nurse when I started it, but now what it's made me realise that there's things out there we have no understanding of.
It bothers me greatly that there are people out there who are having disturbed sleep phenomena like sleep paralysis and night terrors and all these kind of things that don't know that they're sitting on a gold mine.
It's a natural human capacity. There's nothing special about having out-of-body experiences. In fact, possibly what's special or remarkable is the fact that people don't have them more.
If you are going to do it, it's with a purpose of rescuing the traumatized pieces of your mind or to create things in the heavens. That would make a huge difference.
If all 7 billion people had an out-of-body experience, it would suddenly be a collective consciousness wake-up call. Everyone would go, oh my God, what are we fighting over, a hunk of dirt?
Well, I think the important thing for all of your viewers to realize is that they are very crucial in this. No soul left behind. We are all very important in this journey of awakening of humanity.
So if that happened collectively, if everybody underwent an awakening experience and felt this sense of connection and compassion, then the world would become, an infinitely better place.
You will find yourself out there. You will find your limitations. You will find your beliefs. That is valuable to you to see deeper into who you are, deeper into why you're here, and deeper into the nature of reality.
Describe an out-of-body experience for you in one word.
In one word, awareness.
Blowing, extraordinary.
Puzzling.
Epic.
Transcendence of identification with the body.
Shocking.
Expansive.
Live.
Wonder.
Ineffable. Mysterious and fun.
Mystical.
Fantastic for the people who have it.